Hey guys, tonight we are doing one of those topics that sounds calm and then slowly reveals that humans have always been slightly unhinged about organization. So dim the lights, put your phone face down, let your shoulders drop, and get comfortable. We are not racing anywhere. This is not a story about battles or betrayals. This is a story about paperwork, and somehow that makes it even more exhausting. In a very soothing way, because tonight we are drifting into the quiet, dusty world of ancient libraries. Not the dramatic, burning ones you always hear about. Not the cinematic fireballs or shouting crowds. Just the day-to-day reality. The lists. The rules. The labels. The forms. The endless administrative decisions made by people who probably just wanted to go home and drink watered-down wine. And yes, it turns out that even thousands of years ago, knowledge came with bureaucracy. Of course it did. So let's begin where many of these stories quietly start. In a place that smelled like papyrus, damp stone, and mild academic anxiety, we float gently into ancient Mesopotamia. Long before libraries were grand buildings with columns, they were rooms full of clay tablets. Heavy, awkward, rectangular clay tablets. These were not poetic scrolls you could tuck under your arm. These were baked bricks of information. And once you write on clay, you cannot exactly edit it. You cannot cross things out politely. You mess up. And congratulations, you now own a permanent record of your mistake, which means someone had to track them. Enter the first librarians, not romantic scholars. Not wise old men stroking beards, but administrators. Accountants. Record keepers. People whose entire job was making sure the right tablet was in the right place, and that nobody borrowed it and conveniently forgot to bring it back. The Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh is a good place to settle in for a moment. This was around the 7th century BCE. Ashurbanipal was a king who really wanted everyone to know he was educated. He made sure inscriptions mentioned that he could read and write, which for a king at that time was basically the ancient version of flexing an Ivy League degree. So he collected texts. All kinds of texts. Myths. Prayers. Medical instructions. Omens. Dream interpretations. Contracts. Spells to ward off demons who caused toothaches. Because obviously. But here's the quiet chaos. These tablets were in multiple languages. Sumerian. Akkadian. Some bilingual. Some copied badly. Some copied too many times. Some mislabeled. Some not labeled at all. So scribes developed catalog tablets. Yes. Catalogs of tablets that catalogued other tablets. You had tablets that existed purely to say, yes, this tablet exists, and it should be somewhere over there already. You can feel the paperwork breathing. Tablets were grouped by subject. They were stored in baskets or on shelves, and at the end of many tablets, there was a COLOPHON. This was basically a note saying who copied it, where it belonged, and sometimes a warning. Not a dramatic curse, but a mild one. Something like, whoever steals this, may the gods notice. And in ancient terms, that was a very real threat. The irony is peaceful. These libraries were built to preserve knowledge forever. And yet they relied on fragile systems. Mud, labels. Baskets. Wooden, shelves. And humans. Humans who absolutely misplaced things. Let's gently slide forward to Egypt. Because Egypt loved organization. Egypt did not do anything casually. They had paperwork for the paperwork. Temple. Libraries in ancient Egypt were attached to religious complexes. These were sacred knowledge spaces. The house of life. That already sounds calm and intimidating. At the same time, texts here were on papyrus, which is lighter than clay, but also much easier to destroy. So now preservation became a lifestyle. Every scroll had to be copied, and recopied. And checked. And approved. And yes, logged. Egyptian scribes trained for years. They learned precise handwriting. Because consistency mattered, a messy scribe was not quirky. He was a problem. Scrolls were stored in boxes or jars. And each one had tags. Small labels tied with string that said what was inside, the ancient equivalent of a file name. And if the tag fell off, well, now you have a mystery scroll, and nobody wants to accidentally read the wrong hymn to the wrong god. That's how you end up apologizing to the universe. There were inventories. These inventories listed scroll titles, conditions, and locations. And these lists themselves had to be updated. Because scrolls were constantly being moved for rituals, education, or copying. And, of course, someone had to approve access. Not everyone could just walk in and read sacred texts. This meant permissions, verbal ones, written ones, hierarchical ones. You can almost hear the quiet frustration of a junior scribe who just wanted to borrow one medical text but had to ask 3 people and wait until tomorrow. Now let's drift slowly into the Hellenistic world. Because if there was ever a culture that took libraries personally, it was ancient Greece. And later, Hellenistic Egypt. The Library of Alexandria. You knew we would get here, but we are not rushing. This was not just a library. It was a knowledge factory. And factories require systems. The Ptolemies wanted every book in the world. Yes, that was the actual goal. Every ship that docked in Alexandria was searched. Any books found were taken, the originals were kept, the copies were returned, and the ship owners were politely told, "This is fine, actually." To manage this madness, the library developed cataloging on an industrial scale. Enter Callinicus. He was a scholar and poet, but more importantly, he created the PINAKES. This was essentially the first massive library catalogue. The Pinax listed authors, works, subjects, and short descriptions. It was divided by genre. History. Philosophy. Law. Rhetoric. Medicine. Even miscellaneous, which is where all the weird stuff went when nobody knew what to do with it. Each entry noted the author's name, their birthplace, and sometimes a brief biography, because context mattered. Even then, this catalogue itself was enormous. It likely took up multiple scrolls, and it had to be updated constantly, because new texts kept arriving. And scholars kept arguing about classifications. Because of course they did. Imagine the meetings. Imagine two scholars calmly disagreeing for 6 hours about whether a text counted as philosophy or science. And neither one backing down. Now here is this softly ironic part. The Library of Alexandria, with all its ambition, was still vulnerable to human error. Scrolls mislabeled, scrolls shelved incorrectly, scrolls lost, scrolls copied with mistakes, and there was no universal spelling standard. So names varied, titles changed. Sometimes the same work existed under 3 slightly different names, which meant librarians had to cross-reference. They had to remember aliases. They had to recognize when two scrolls were actually the same text pretending not to be. This was mental labor. Not glamorous. Just slow, patient, brain-heavy work. Let's float west for a moment into Rome. Because Rome loved order, but also loved complexity. Roman libraries were public. This was a big deal. Knowledge was no longer just for priests or kings, but public access does not mean chaos. It means rules. Scrolls were stored in armaria, wooden cabinets. Each cabinet had sections. Each section had labels. And yes, there were attendants. You did not grab a scroll yourself. You asked a library attendant retrieved it. You read it there. You did not leave with it, because Romans understood one eternal truth. If you let people take things home, they will not come back. Catalogs existed, but so did memory. A good librarian was expected to know the collection by heart. This was professional pride. And then there were acquisition records. When a library received a donation, there was documentation. Who donated it, what it was, whether it was original or copied, whether it had already been catalogued somewhere else. Libraries competed. They compared collections. They bragged quietly, and scholars complained. Constantly. About access, about missing texts. About bad copies, about handwriting. Some things truly never change. Now, let's slow down even more and think about the people doing this work. These were not powerful figures. They were not kings. They were not generals. They were scribes. Librarians. Assistants. Record keepers. They worked in silence. They worried about moisture. Fire. Insects. They worried about fading ink. They worried about human negligence. They created systems knowing those systems would fail if one person stopped caring. And yet they kept going. They created catalogs knowing they would need new catalogs later. They labeled knowing labels fall off. They copied knowing copies introduce errors. There is something almost tender about that. Because ancient libraries were not just collections of texts. They were living systems. Slow ones, delicate ones. And the paperwork was not optional. It was the skeleton. Without lists. There was chaos. With too many lists. There was exhaustion. And they lived right in the middle of that. So, as we gently close this first stretch, imagine a quiet room, filled with shelves, a librarian walking slowly, checking tags, making small corrections, rewriting an inventory tablet because one scroll moved. No drama. No applause. just the steady hum of preservation. This is where things get gently messy. Not dramatic. Just administratively exhausting. Because ancient libraries had a problem that still haunts modern ones. They were too successful. Let's float back to Alexandria for a moment. Not the burning, not the myths. Just a regular day. The docks are busy. A ship arrives. Someone finds scrolls. They are brought in. And now the paperwork begins. First question: what are these texts? Second question: who wrote them? Third question: are they originals or copies? And fourth question: where do they go? And the worst question of all: do we already have this? Because duplication was everywhere. Scholars loved copying. Sometimes poorly, sometimes creatively, sometimes with added commentary slipped in like an unsolicited opinion. So librarians had to compare texts line by line. This is slow work. This is eye-strain work. This is the kind of work that makes you question your life choices. And classifications were not fixed. Genres were fluid. Philosophy bled into science. Poetry hid history. History exaggerated everything. So shelving was an argument waiting to happen. One librarian says, "This is astronomy." Another says, "No. This is religious cosmology." A third says, "It belongs in mathematics because there are numbers." And meanwhile the scroll is just sitting there, judging everyone silently. Catalogs had to evolve. They grew longer. They became layered. Now you had main catalogs, subcatalogs, and personal notes. Some scholars kept their own lists because they did not trust the official ones, which is never a great sign for institutional confidence. Now imagine updating all of this by hand. No printing. No shortcuts. Just rewriting. If one major reclassification happened, you might have to redo entire sections of the Pnyx. And yes, people complained. Ancient scholars left us texts complaining about libraries. Not enough access. Too much gatekeeping. Bad organization. Missing works. They loved libraries, but they were not shy about criticizing them. Let's drift east for a bit. Because while Greece and Rome get the spotlight, other civilizations were quietly drowning in paperwork too. In ancient China, libraries were deeply tied to the state. Texts were power. Power required control. Control required documentation. Imperial libraries kept records of classics, histories, ritual texts, and administrative manuals. And these were not optional reads. They were ideological tools, which meant accuracy mattered a lot. Texts were standardized. Banned texts were listed. Destroyed texts were tracked. Surviving copies were recorded. Yes. Even destruction had paperwork. Officials maintained catalogs that listed titles, versions, and lineage of transmission. Who copied it? From whom? And when? This mattered because corruption of a text was seen as corruption of moral order. No pressure. And because dynasties changed, libraries were constantly reorganized. New regimes rewrote priorities. Suddenly, this text matters. That one is suspicious. This one must be revised. Which meant librarians were always working in shifting political weather. Imagine carefully preserving a text for decades, only for a new emperor to say, "Actually, This is wrong now, and you must update the records accordingly. Calmly. Of course. Now let's pause on the human side again. Because librarians were not neutral machines. They had opinions. They had loyalties. They had exhaustion. Some hid texts. Some mislabeled intentionally. Some quietly copied things they knew might not survive. And that created secret paperwork. Personal catalogues. Private lists. Hidden notes. Which is both touching and stressful. Because now the official record and the real record diverged. And future librarians had to figure out why things did not match. Nothing keeps historians awake like mismatched inventories. Now we slide into medieval times. The tone shifts slightly, not louder. Just heavier. Monastic libraries. These were quiet places. But the silence was full of rules. Monks copied texts as spiritual labor. Every word mattered. A mistake was not just an error. It was a moral slip. So manuscripts were tracked obsessively. Who copied it? When? How long it took. What exemplar was used. Margins were full of notes. Not just commentary, but apologies. I am tired. My hand hurts. Pray for me. Yes. Even medieval scribes complained in the margins. Because humans are consistent. Libraries had chained books. Literally chained. Because theft was a thing. And chains meant location mattered. Which meant catalogues had to note not just what the book was, but where it was chained, and to what. And whether the chain was long enough to read comfortably. Imagine logging that. There were lending rules, strict ones. Some monasteries allowed limited borrowing. Others did not. Every loan was recorded. Return dates were tracked. And punishments were outlined. Not dramatic ones. Just shame. Spiritual disappointment. The worst kind. And books wore out. Pages tore. Ink faded. Covers broke. So condition reports became a thing. Yes. Even then. Now imagine a monk. Later in life, updating a catalogue he himself wrote decades earlier. Noticing handwriting changes. Noticing missing volumes. Noticing that time has quietly eaten things. There is something profoundly sleepy about that image. Now let's gently address a strange irony. Ancient libraries were obsessed with order, but knowledge itself resists order. New ideas did not fit old categories. Authors contradicted each other. Texts evolved. So catalogues were always behind reality. Always catching up. Always slightly wrong. Which means librarians lived with permanent imperfection. They knew their lists were incomplete. They knew errors existed. They knew future readers would judge them. And still, they kept going. They rewrote. They reorganized. They updated. Not because it was perfect, but because it was necessary. And when libraries fell, it was often not sudden. It was slow. Neglect. Inventory updates skipped. Shelves unchecked. Copies delayed. Paperwork lapsed. And knowledge quietly scattered. Not with fire, but with silence. So as we come to the end of this stretch, stay in the calm of it. No battles. No screams. Just the soft tragedy of systems stretched to thin. Just forgetting. Because most ancient knowledge did not vanish in flames. It vanished in ledgers. Let's imagine a library that is still standing. The walls are intact. The shelves are full. The librarians are still coming to work. And yet, Somehow, texts begin to slip away. It starts small. A scroll is loaned out and not logged properly. Someone intends to write it down later. They do not. A month passes. A year passes. The memory fades. Another text is copied, but the original is returned to the wrong shelf. It sits there quietly, mislabeled, and now it technically exists, but functionally, it is gone. Catalogs fall behind. This happens when staffing changes. Old librarians retire or die. New ones inherit systems they did not design. They follow the rules, but they do not know the shortcuts, the unwritten logic, the quiet mental maps. So things drift. Now imagine a large ancient library during a political transition. New leadership, new funding priorities. Some projects are paused. Copying slows. Catalog updates are postponed. A temporary delay becomes permanent. And the most dangerous thing of all happens. Someone decides a list is good enough. That is how knowledge dies peacefully. In Alexandria, for example, we know that copies were constantly made. But we also know that not everything was recopied evenly. Popular texts survived. Unpopular ones did not. And popularity is not the same as importance. Technical manuals faded. Local histories vanished. Minor philosophical schools were forgotten. Not because they were wrong, but because nobody felt like updating their index card. Libraries favored prestige. Big names. Big genres. Big thinkers. The rest quietly fell off the list. Now let's drift into Rome again. Roman libraries were impressive, but they relied heavily on active use. A text that was not read was not recopied. A text that was not recopied did not survive. And librarians did not have infinite time. They prioritized demand, which means the reading habits of a few elites shaped what survived for centuries. Think about that as you rest. The future was curated by whoever showed up that week. Now we move into late antiquity. This is where the administrative cracks widen. Empires weaken. Budgets shrink. Libraries lose staff. Catalogs stop being updated regularly. Books age. Manuscripts decay. And nobody has the resources to fix everything. So choices are made. This one can be saved. That one can wait. This one is too damaged. That one is too obscure. Paperwork becomes triage. And when triage ends, some things are simply not written down anymore. They do not burn. They do not explode. They just do not make it onto the next list. Now let's gently step into the medieval period again. Because monasteries became accidental guardians of ancient knowledge. Monks copied what they needed for theology. Philosophy that supported doctrine survived. Other philosophy did not. Medical texts survived unevenly. Science survived selectively. Poetry survived sporadically. And libraries reflected that. Their catalogs were spiritual documents. They mirrored belief systems. So what we inherit today is not a neutral sample. It is a filtered one. And the filtering was done by tired humans writing inventories by candlelight. There are surviving medieval catalogs that list books no longer known to exist. They are ghost entries, titles with no surviving copies, authors known only by name, entire works reduced to a line in a list that is haunting in a very quiet way, because somewhere, Someone once held that book. Someone copied it. Someone read it. And now it is just a sentence fragment in an old catalogue. Let's slow even more here. Imagine a monk checking shelves. He reads a title on a list. He looks. He cannot find it. He assumes it was lost earlier. He makes a note. Maybe, or maybe he does not. And that is it. The book is officially gone. Now let's talk about damage. Because libraries age just like people. Ink fades. Pages crack. Bindings loosen. Insects eat corners. Mold creeps in quietly. Librarians noted this. They recorded conditions. They marked texts as damaged. But damaged texts require labor to repair. And labor costs time. And time was limited. So damaged books were sometimes left aside. Set aside becomes forgotten. Forgotten becomes lost. Again. Not dramatic. Just gentle neglect. Now consider relocation. Libraries moved during wars, during reforms, during renovations. Books packed into crates. Crates mislabeled. Crates left behind. Someone writes. Contents unknown. And plans to revisit later. Later never comes. Now imagine future scholars finding these crates centuries later. With no context. No catalogue. No order. They do their best. They reconstruct. But gaps remain. And those gaps exist because of one skipped note. Now let's acknowledge something important. Ancient librarians knew this risk. They worried about it. They wrote about it. They understood that catalogues were fragile. That knowledge survival depended on boring consistency. And they tried. They created duplicate catalogues. They stored lists separately. They trained successors carefully. But nothing lasts forever. Human systems decay. And sometimes, a library does not even realize it has lost something until someone asks for it. That is the most unsettling part. A scholar arrives. He requests a text. The librarian checks the list. It should be here. It is not. Now there is confusion. Did it ever exist? Was the catalogue wrong? Was the book lost? Who is responsible? And there is no answer. Just silence. Now breathe here. This is not sad in a loud way. It is sad in a quiet, evening way. Because it reminds us that survival is not heroic. It is procedural. And procedures fail when attention fades. As we settle at the end of this part. Remember this. Most ancient knowledge was not destroyed. It was mismanaged. It slipped through cracks made of fatigue, assumptions, and delayed updates. Every large ancient library eventually reached a moment where someone stood back, looked at the shelves, looked at the catalogues, and quietly said, "This has gotten out of hand." These people were not revolutionaries. They were organizers, the most dangerous kind of optimist. They believed chaos could be tamed. Not with force, but with better paperwork. Let's return briefly to the Hellenistic world. Because Alexandria did not just collect texts. It constantly tried to reinvent how they were organized. After the Pnyx, there were revisions. And then revisions of revisions. New genres added. Old ones split apart. Author names standardized. Or at least attempted. Someone decided that biographies should be separated from works. Someone else decided birthplace mattered. Someone argued that chronology should be primary. Someone disagreed. Asterisk. So reforms stacked on top of reforms. Asterisk. The problem was not intelligence. The problem was scale. Asterisk. Every improvement created new work. You change one category, and suddenly hundreds of scrolls need to be moved, and every move must be recorded, and every record must be cross-checked. Asterisk. And humans get tired. Asterisk. Reformers underestimated fatigue. Asterisk. They also underestimated attachment. Asterisk. Librarians grew attached to systems they knew. A new system meant relearning everything. Mental maps erased. Memory replaced. Asterisk. So resistance happened. Not dramatic protest. Just slow compliance. Delayed updates. Partial adoption. Asterisk. Which is how you end up with hybrid systems. Some shelves following the old rules. Some following the new ones. Asterisk. Nothing matches perfectly. Asterisk. Now let's float into Rome again, because Rome loved reform, but hated disruption. Asterisk. Emperors sponsored libraries. They expanded them. They wanted efficiency. Asterisk. Some tried to standardize catalogs across multiple libraries. This sounds logical. It also sounds impossible. Asterisk. Different collections. Different histories. Different priorities. Asterisk. Forcing uniformity meant flattening nuance. Asterisk. And nuance is where knowledge hides. Asterisk. So standard catalogs became vague. And vague catalogs are not very helpful. Asterisk. Librarians compensated by keeping private notes. Personal guides. Unofficial lists. Asterisk. Which defeated the purpose. Asterisk. Now imagine being a junior librarian inheriting this. You have the official catalogue, the unofficial supplements, the oral traditions. And the shelves themselves, which do not care about any of it. Asterisk. This is where burnout enters the story. Asterisk. Ancient texts do not talk much about librarian burnout, but you can feel it in the margins. In the complaints. In the sloppy handwriting. Asterisk. People stopped aiming for perfection. They aimed for good enough. Asterisk. Now let's slide gently into the medieval period again, because medieval librarians genuinely believed order was divine. Asterisk. Monastic reforms happened frequently. New rules, new layouts, new catalogue formats. Asterisk. Some monasteries reorganized entire libraries alphabetically. This sounds efficient, until you remember that spelling was not standardized. Asterisk. Alphabetical order depends on agreement, and agreement was rare. Asterisk. Other monasteries organized by size. Because shelves fit better that way. Others by subject. Others by frequency of use. Asterisk. Some tried multiple systems at once. Asterisk. And again. Reforms required copying catalogs. Rewriting shelf labels. Retraining monks. Asterisk. Mistakes happened. Asterisk. And when mistakes happened, corrections were not always recorded. Asterisk. Which means reform sometimes caused more loss than neglect. Asterisk. Now let's pause on a subtle irony. Asterisk. The people most obsessed with preserving knowledge often introduce the most risk. Asterisk. Because change creates gaps. Asterisk. And gaps swallow things. Asterisk. Now let's move east again, to China, where large-scale reforms were both ambitious and terrifying. Asterisk. Imperial bibliographic projects attempted to list all known texts, classify them, standardize titles, remove duplicates, Asterisk scholars worked for years on these projects. Asterisk and yet. Even these monumental efforts admitted limitations. They used phrases like, to the best of our knowledge. Asterisk that phrase is doing a lot of work. Asterisk because no catalogue ever captured everything. Asterisk and when a catalogue was declared complete, anything not listed became invisible. Asterisk this is how official knowledge forms. Asterisk now imagine being an author whose work did not make the cut. Not because it was bad. But because it did not fit the classification scheme. Asterisk that work still existed. But it was now unofficial. Undocumented. Precarious. Asterisk which means survival depended on private copying, not institutional support. Asterisk again. The paperwork shaped the future. Asterisk now let's talk about labels. Because labels are small, but powerful. Asterisk ancient libraries labeled shelves, scrolls, boxes, cabinets. Asterisk labels fell off. They were replaced. Sometimes incorrectly. Asterisk once a label was wrong. Long enough, it became right. Asterisk future librarians trusted it. Asterisk and a mislabel could shift a text's identity permanently. Asterisk a philosophical treatise becomes a religious one. A scientific manual becomes folklore. Asterisk classification changed interpretation. Asterisk which means paperwork did not just organize knowledge, it redefined it. Asterisk now imagine reformers trying to fix mislabeling. They relied on expertise. Memory. Cross-referencing. Asterisk. But expertise dies. Memory fades. Cross-referencing depends on accurate references. Asterisk so fixes were partial. Asterisk and partial fixes leave residue. Asterisk now we slow down again. Because this is tiring work. Asterisk imagine a reform-minded librarian late at night. Candles low. Eyes sore. Hand cramped. He is convinced that tomorrow things will be better. Asterisk he redraws a shelf map. He updates a list. He feels accomplished. Asterisk. And then a shipment of new texts arrives. Asterisk and everything shifts again. Asterisk this is the quiet tragedy of organization. It is never finished. Asterisk now let's address something else. Control. Asterisk libraries were power structures. And reforms were often about control. Asterisk who decides what matters. Who decides categories? Who decides access? Asterisk so reforms were political. Asterisk and politics changes priorities. Asterisk which means catalogues reflect ideology. Asterisk what is included. What is excluded? What is downgraded? Asterisk all written calmly. In neat handwriting. Asterisk which makes it feel neutral. Asterisk it was not. Asterisk and librarians knew that. They navigated carefully. Asterisk some leaned into reforms. Some resisted quietly. Some complied outwardly, but preserved old systems in parallel. Asterisk which means libraries became layered spaces. Historical strata of organization. Asterisk future scholars digging through these layers feel confusion. They find contradictions. They find duplicates. They find ghosts. Asterisk all because someone tried to make things clearer. Asterisk now breathe. Asterisk this is not failure. It is humanity. Asterisk we want order. We create it. We complicate it. We reform it. we exhaust ourselves. Asterisk, and knowledge survives anyway. Partially. Imperfectly. Asterisk, as we settle at the end of this part. Remember this. Asterisk, ancient libraries were not static. They were constantly under construction. Asterisk, every catalogue was a snapshot, not a truth. Asterisk, every reform promised clarity and delivered complexity. By this point, the shelves are heavy, the catalogues are thick, the systems are layered on top of each other like sediment, and the librarians are tired. Not dramatically tired, just the long, slow tired that comes from maintaining something that will never be finished. This is where maintenance replaces ambition. Libraries stop expanding aggressively. They stop chasing completeness. They focus on keeping what they already have usable. Copying slows, reforms, pause. Catalog updates become occasional instead of constant, and that is not failure. That is realism. Aging librarians train younger ones. They pass on unwritten rules. This shelf before that one. This list is more reliable than that one. If something seems missing, it probably is. Knowledge becomes local. And then, slowly, the world changes around the library. Trade routes shift, political centers move, languages evolve, readers disappear. A library without readers becomes storage. And storage without purpose becomes burden. Budgets shrink. Space is repurposed. Rooms are reassigned. A cabinet is moved. A shelf is dismantled. A crate is placed in a corner. Someone writes, to be sorted later. Later does not arrive. This is how most ancient libraries end. Not destroyed, but absorbed, folded into something else. Their texts scatter. Some copied, some reused, some forgotten. And the catalogues? They survive unevenly. Some remain as fragments, some as quotations, some as references. In other works. We know books existed because lists say they did. That is both comforting and unsettling, because it means knowledge left a shadow. Now let's sit with the librarians. For one last moment. They were not heroes. They were not villains. They were caretakers. They argued about categories. They worried about labels. They rewrote lists they knew would someday be wrong. They understood that preservation was temporary, and they did it anyway, because the act mattered. Ancient libraries were never about permanence. They were about continuity for as long as possible, and paperwork was the thread. So tonight, as you rest, remember this. Behind every ancient text you have ever heard of, there were dozens you have not. Behind every surviving idea, there were inventories, lists, labels, and tired people trying their best. No drama. Just effort. And that is a very human ending. So let the shelves fade gently into darkness. Let the catalogues close. Let the librarian blow out the candle carefully, so the smoke does not stain the ceiling. That knowledge rested here for a while. And for tonight. That is enough.
Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools and no books. This is the story of fire. Fire is not just a thing but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People shivered at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal we are afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe Cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factors started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you. Today, now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Today we will talk about a very old history topic. This story is from a time when there were no house, no cities, no schools, and no books. This is the story of Fire. Fire is not just a thing, but that burns. Fire changed everything. Fire made human different from animals. Without fire, there would be no food like today, no protection, no progress, and maybe no modern world. This is the story of how fire slowly changed human life step by step. Long, long ago, humans were very weak. They had no clothes, no proper homes, and no weapons. They lived in forest and open land. They were always afraid. Big animals hunted them, cold weather, hot there, dark nights scared them. Human ate raw food. Raw meat was hard to chew. Raw plants were bitter and dangerous. People got sick easily. Many people died young. Life was very hard. The first time humans saw fire. Yes, fire was not first made by human. Fire came from nature. Lighting heat trees, volcanoes burned land, dry forest caught fire. Early humans saw fire from far away. They saw bright light. They felt heat. At first, they were scared. Fire was dangerous. Fire burned skin. Fire destroyed trees. But humans are curious. They watched fire carefully. Slowly, humans understood something important. Fire is dangerous, but fire is also useful. Fire give heat, fire give light. People start keeping fire interested of running away. They carried burning wood from natural fire. They portrayed that fire carefully. If fire dead, life became hard again. Fire became like a friend. Fire and warmth. Cold weather was deadly before fire. Winter killed many people. People slept at night. Fire changed this. Fire kept human warm and people could live in a colder place. They could travel to new lands. Fire helped humans survive winter. This was a very big change in history. Fire and light. Before fire, night was very dark. Darkness brought fear. Wild animal hunted at night. Fire brought light. People could see at night. They could stay together. They could talk and think. This helped humans before social. This helped humans share idea. Fire created community. Fire and protection. Fire scared wild animal. Animal were afraid of flame. They stayed away from fire. Humans used fire as protection. They slept near fire. This saved many lives. Fire became a side. Fire and cooked food. This was one of the biggest change in human history. Yes, human learned to cook food. Cooked meat was soft. Cooked plant were safe. People became stronger. Their brains grew bigger. Good food gave more energy. Scientists believe cooking helped human become intelligent. Fire helped create the human brain. Fire and tools. Fire helped humans make tools. They hardened wood in fire. They shaped stone using heat. Later, fire helped me melt metal. This lead to copper tools. They bronze tools. They iron tools. Fire started technology. Fire and caves. Human lived in caves. Caves were dark and cold. Fire made caves livable. Fire kept animal away. Fire gave light inside cave. Human painted on cave walls using firelight. This was early art. This was early culture. Fire and social life. Fire brought people together. People sat around fire, they talked, they shared stories. This was the beginning of language, this was the beginning of tradition. Fire created human society, learned to make fire. At first, human protected natural fire. Later, they learned to make fire. They rubbed stones, they rubbed wood. This was a huge discovery. Now fire was always available. Human we are no longer dependent on nature. This was the freedom. Fire and migration. Fire allowed humans to move. They went to good lands. They crossed mountains. Fire helped humans to spread across the world, from Africa to Asia, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to everywhere. Fire helped humans conquering that plant. Fire and religion. Religion. Fire became scared. People believe fire was a magic. People worshipped fire. Yes, many religions used fire. Fire rituals started. Fire became a symbol of life. Fire and farming. Fire helped clear forest. People burned land. This made farming possible. Yes, farming changed human life. People settled down. Villages formed and cities were born. Are you know? Fast start civilization. Fire and industry. Thousands of years later, fire powered machine, fire boiled water, steam and gas were born. Factories started, trains moved, fire became energy. Fire and modern world. Today, fire still help us. Electric comes from fire. Cooking or users use fire. Industries uses fire, and fire still saves human life. Conclusion: fire is not just that the fire is the history. Fire made humans human. Without fire, there would be no civilization, no cities, no technology. Fast is the greatest discovery in human history. This, thank you today. Now this is a very interesting story. I am feeling very relaxed now, because I am try to very best now to please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.